Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother, asarimhotep, with the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology, and this is the O.G.U.N. And today's discussion is titled O.G.U.N. and the Systemization of African-Centered Scientific Learning. And we are going to talk about reconceptualizing the so-called and making them applicable for African-centered spaces. So all that and more when we return in just a moment. And we are back, and just want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today here on the Mbongi, as I stated earlier. And it's been a minute, but I have been on the grind, getting some stuff done. I need to shave because my Anthony Hamilton is coming in. But, you know, as always, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining the discussion. And, you know, as I like to do during the live, there's a few of you who always like to make yourself known in the chat. And so I like to acknowledge you. And we are streaming live on Facebook, of course, YouTube, and on X, formerly known as Twitter. And so if you're on Twitter or X, I won't be able to see your comments, but if you are joining live from Facebook or YouTube, I will. So, peace and blessings to Leo Vinzin. Vinzin, I don't know how to pronounce that. Hopefully, I'm not too far off, but thank you for joining. Edward Enigma 9x9 is in the building. O.G.U.N's Machete is in the house. Thank you for joining. And a fitting name for today's discussion, right? And Obama is in the building, and Bolo Samba, he says, and Ujama is said by Teti Ursuma Atras Neferu, and we have Olarisha 504, all the way from the NOLA, I believe. Peace and blessings to you as well, and thank you for joining the discussion. And so, of course, all of you who are catching the archive, love and light to you as well. And got one more entry here. Machona Nuno is in the building. So thank you, and hotep to you for joining the discussion. And so, you know, quick announcement, as y'all know, this is my most recent text, Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, Towards an Etymology of the Place Named Kemet. It is currently available on my website at asarimhotep.com, as well as Amazon. And so since we got a bit to cover, I just want to get right into it. So the first thing that I want to do is share a 9-minute and 38-second video from Dr. Shormarka Keita. And this is a video that I shot in 2018. And this was at the Sheikh Anta Diop conference here in Philadelphia. And what he talks about is greatly applicable to what we're going to discuss today. And so what Dr. Keita is going to discuss in the context in which he's stating it is, you know, if we were to create an ideal Africana Studies department, what types of professors and professions should be included within this uh, in this department? And so what you'll see him talk about is essentially we need more Africana Studies persons who are in the quote unquote STEM fields. And then we're going to jump from that and add on to what he's saying in a larger context in terms of the African world. And so I'm just going to share my screen, and I'm going to, let's go window, and nope, we're going to go Chrome tab. There we go. And also share audio. Yep. And so hopefully y'all can see that there. And what I'm going to do is just reduce my window. I'm just going to make this full screen so you can better see it. And so let me know in the comment section if you don't hear it.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay. I'm Shamarka Keita, biological anthropologist, and I'm a physician, but had a long interest in pedagogy. I should ask the elders, may I speak? May I speak? Thank you. All right. My talk is going to be very short. The talk is basically about curricula and how, if we had our way, how would we populate an ideal African studies program in terms of its ancient component. I just want to say in general, I enjoyed the first talk on public health because, you know, that should be a component of any department that we would have about African studies, Africana studies, Black studies, whatever we want to call it, because that's very important. However, we know the resources are limited. So I put up here an idealized because we don't have those kinds of funds in general. But there are certain things in terms of ancient African studies that I think are very important. And I'm going to mention a few things. I'm more interested in discussion. I'm going to be done very quickly. So later on in the questions section, or even after that at lunch, we can sit, if we wish, and talk about what we think might go into such a department. Now, which one of these do I push? The one on the right? Okay. It's not working. I'm in the, what am I doing? Oh, point up. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, please.
On.
Oh, it's not on. Oh, okay.
No, it's also just being weird. No, it's on.
So it's on.
It's just being weird.
Do you hit this red thing?
No, the left and right.
Oh. Okay. All right. Point at screen.
There we go. View specific.
You may need to advance it.
Oh,
Okay. All right.
stop.
Basically, there, in my conception of, we want in any disciplinary approach, a department, to always have critical perspectives. We have inherited many academic disciplines that have been tainted in one way or the other by Eurocentrism, colonialism, or what have you. So we always have to know how to invert the question. We have to be on guard and look for the persistence of those kinds of elements in any disciplines that we do, all right, that we study. Sometimes things lurk and they're embedded in terminology. Sometimes the terms you use to describe something have embedded within them a way that forces you to talk a certain way, to think a certain way, that are very misleading, or that leads you into a way that's incomplete knowledge or not as good knowledge, okay? Generalists and specialists, we need to have people who master enough, get familiar enough with many topics so that they can teach the public and teach the typical student, to have a broad view, and to be competent enough to even put general books together, as well as the specialists who drill down hard, who become masters and do the primary research. Okay? One possible list: paleontologists, people who do geography / climatology, archaeology, both the Holocene and the pre-Holocene. The Holocene begins about 10,000 years ago. Biological anthropology, historical linguistics, and we regional specialists, by which I mean under Northeast Africa would be Egyptologists, people who do ancient Ethiopia, ancient Nubia. West Africa, people who might be interested in the kingdoms of Mali, the Ashanti, etc. Northeast Nigeria. Central Africa, the kingdom of the Congo and other such states, and South Africa. You may have recently heard about the new find in South Africa of a city that Johannesburg would have been built on the ruins of. Using some very sophisticated measures, they found a settlement that would have had 10,000 people in it. Kareem Sada is the archaeologist on that project. Okay. Now, archaeology, all periods, but especially the Iron Age is important in terms of talking about current African societies, okay? The Iron Age. So when you talk about ancient Ghana, Mali, the Kingdom of the Congo, and other Ethiopia, the Zulu Kingdom, those areas, archaeology becomes very important. There are very few departments, not saying that there are none, that have Iron Age archaeologists in them in terms of Africana studies, okay? Archaeology oftentimes has not been a part of departments that were born out of the heat of the 60s. I'm not speaking of the old line African studies departments that were founded in the 1950s with Winter-Grin money. I'm talking about the things that came out of the 1960s. So we kingdoms and societies and African culture and African literature at a certain level, but we don't have people who are necessarily specialists in those areas that were trained over this last 50-year period. I could probably stand here and name them. Biological anthropology, study of old skeletons. There have been interesting studies on the Yoruba from the 19th century that give us ideas about health, but we want to avoid certain things, simple-minded things. Historical linguistics, key area for uncovering social life and community interactions in earlier periods. I have just one book I want to mention about this. It's a book written by a woman named Karen Kleiman, a student of Chris Eric. The title of the book is The Pygmies Were Our Compass. Bantu and Batwa from the early ages to the to current period, to the 19th century. What Dr. Kleiman did in this book is she removed the so-called pygmies, let's call them the Mbudi people and the others. She removed them from this notion of them being remnant populations who were leftover hunters and gatherers. And she did something, even though she's European, Euro-American, she rebranded them, which is what we have to do. She calls them forest specialists. And she showed, using historical linguistics and archaeology, how they were actors with agency in the construction of the social life of the things that came before the societies of the Kingdom of the Congo and the other kingdoms in West Central Africa. So if you've never seen that book, The Pygmies Were Our Compass, Karen Kleiman, I would recommend that you take a look at that. It shows the potential of historical linguistics in that kind of recovery of data for understanding society and communities, synthesized with archaeology to get a background for things that we have come to talk about at this time. This is a major issue. How do we get people interested? And where do we provide the places for them to work? It's been a long-running discussion between Malefe, Asante, and myself. How do we get new scholars? How do we get people interested in historical linguistics? Because that's not something you just breeze through. How do we get people interested in archaeology, or for that matter, Egyptology, to do the whole full training? And then once you get people trained, we have to provide the spaces for them to do their work, to be on the teams within our own institutions, which I mean, those of our institutions embedded in state structures, but also historically black colleges. Because if you have 100 historically black colleges and none of them or a few of them only have Iron Age archaeologists, that means there's a whole lot of space to expand into a niche or you know, in any other discipline. I'm done. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much. So again, we want to debate this and discuss. We want not debate it, but what other ideas might you have on who you would have in that idealized department of the ancient component of African studies? Thank you.
And I hope you were able to grasp what he was saying in that video. Again, it was a 9-minute and 38-minute video. And, you know, what he was talking about, and that was, for those who are just joining, that was Dr. Sharmarka Keita, who is a biological anthropologist. And in 2018, he presented at the Sheikh Anta Diop conference. And, you know, what he talked about was creating an idealized Africana Studies department, and what types of scholars would we need for this his idealized Africana Studies department. And so what he talked about was this need for more of us to get into the hard sciences, but to apply the hard sciences in the classical African space, because we need people, you know, on our side, basically, who are archaeologists, who are bioanthropologists, who are geneticists, who are, you know, archaeoastronomers, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a need for that type of training. There's a need for that type of textbooks and teaching, and of course, the space so that they can work and live off of, you know, their skill set. And so what I want to say in addition to that is that we not only need that in terms of Africana studies, but we just need that in general. And for many of us to get into the quote unquote hard sciences, and this would, you know, in the modern time, since, you know, the 90s, they have created this acronym called STEM, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But so that's the nature of the talk today, and how I want to this concept of STEM within an Afrocentric context. And so we're going to talk about what STEM is. We're going to talk about Afrocentricity and why, you know, would we need an Afrocentric science application, right? So I'm going to share my screen again, and peace and blessings to those who just joined the conversation. So love and light to Sister Mika, who reminds each and every one of you that's right. Thumb up the video and like, share, and subscribe if you have not subscribed to the channel. Peace and blessings to Black Alchemy. And our good brother Zoo 221 is in the building. And Black Alchemy seems to agree with Dr. Sharmarka Keita. So thank you for joining again And so now we're going to get started. So I'm going to stop sharing and reshare. And we'll do the entire screen this time. And let's do full screen. Let's hide that. And let's go all the way to the beginning. Right? So hopefully y'all can see that. And I have my phone here so I can see any chat questions. And if we have some time, I may, open it up for conversation. So I'll try to go through this as quickly as possible. And can't seem to get my charger to work on this cell phone, but it is what it is. Right? We'll forget that. So let's continue. So again, O.G.U.N and the systemization of African-centered scientific learning. And if you have not joined the Patreon, this channel is supported by those of you who are Patreon members, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you. And if you would like to contribute not only to the upcoming film, but to keep the channel going, please consider joining the patreon.com/asarimhotep address. And you have some cool things coming up, and your support would be greatly rewarded. And so I mentioned STEM earlier, and for those who don't know, STEM is an acronym that stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And the STEM, as the code wizards HQ defines it is as an approach to education that focuses on the hard sciences versus the social sciences, like culture or anthropology or philosophy or something like that, right? It develops critical thinking skills and improves problem-solving abilities. So in the sciences, they have biochemistry or biophysics, environmental sciences, hydrology, geoscience, medicine, technology, computer science, industrial design, information technology, engineering, aerospace engineering, biomedical engineering, electrical engineering, applied mathematics in math, and data science and statistics, which kind of data science will be in computer science. But there's always some overlap, right? So this is the general meaning of STEM. And as is being promoted, STEM education leads to better careers, but there's kind of also some controversy in all of this, because a lot of research dollars and funding goes to the so-called STEM fields, and so other fields want to be included in the STEM. And so there's debates. Should you consider psychology as part of a STEM field, for example? And what constitutes that? Like what constitutes a quote unquote hard science, right? Like this is stuff that's being debated, currently. And so, but many people join STEM. There's a few who just have a general curiosity of the fields you just mentioned. But there are also those who enter them because there are greater opportunities for career stability and the like. But we also got to keep in mind that in this modern age, a lot of used to be considered, stable in the STEM fields is slowly being chipped away. And in some instances is actually being rapidly chipped away. So if you went to school for computer science and data science, for example, you have these AI, large language models and programs right now that is doing a lot of that has the ability to do a lot of that work that cuts the workforce. So how, is the prospects of those who are software engineers and developers, who are currently, in school for these things, and their jobs may not be there. You may not need as many architects or engineers because, basically you're working off of laws of physics that have already been, kind of solidified. And so you can store these formulas and you can create software that can be able to do certain things that you would normally hire, folks for. And so, if you want to be a rocket scientist, if NASA is reducing jobs, who else do you work for? You may have Boeing, but Boeing has layoffs, and hopefully Elon Musk can develop a commercial space program, and but there seems to be fewer and fewer opportunities. And so this is part of the discourse now. And so in more recent times, they have made the acronym to spell the word STEAM, including A in the acronym for arts, because what the argument was is that, without a creative mind, these fields are not as potent as they could be. There's, of course, you're dealing with laws of physics, and so there's only a limit to what you can do per se when you're designing certain things. But how this is applied, what new inventions, you have to have something to stimulate the creative faculties of the student, of the human person, for them to be able to dream up future technologies and processes and the like. So it's not only problem solving, you know this like what Disney calls Imagineers, right? People who can engineer deep imaginary spaces, right? And this is why more and more people are leaning towards calling it STEAM instead of STEM. Now, in this discourse, because we're African centered and, we are budding Africologists, we like to do things in our own unique way. And this is why I have created the acronym O.G.U.N a little later. But first, I want to um, reintroduce you all to the concept of Afrocentricity. And there's a video that I've done before that has shown and detailed this symbol that we created right here to represent the concept of Afrocentricity. And that's, if to re-emphasize what you see on the screen would take a long time unto itself, so we'll save that for another time. But the father of Afrocentricity as a discipline and philosophy is Dr. Molefi Kete Asante, originally from Georgia, I believe, but has become nativized out here in Philadelphia, especially at Temple University, the home of the first Africana Studies and Africology department, to where you can get a PhD, in this field. So he has defined Afrocentricity as the study of the ideas and events from the standpoint of Africans as the key players rather than victims. So you're centralizing the ideas, the creative faculties, the history, the perspective, the worldview the languages, the culture of African people when we're telling the story of African people. So we never talk about, for example, when Europeans explored and discovered, for example, Lake Nyanza and called it Victoria. That's not an Afrocentric perspective. An Afrocentric perspective is when the native Africans discovered the Europeans on their native lands, right? And you know, who were those people? What was going on in their lives? How did they view the outsiders, etc., when they invaded? So these are the kinds of things that we do when we're talking about Afrocentricity. It's a social theory of relativity, an Afrocentric theory of relativity, which we'll have another discussion on in the future. But this theory becomes, by virtue of an authentic relationship to the centrality of our own reality, a fundamentally empirical project, right? And from his website, you know, expanding on the Afrocentric method, he talks about it in this wise. The Afrocentric method considers that no phenomenon can be apprehended adequately without locating it first. So for those of you who study Afrocentricity, you know there's a component of Afrocentricity called location theory, right? And this is why I call this the relativity, you know, the social relativity theory, because just like in general relativity, you know, where time, space are coordinates, are the four dimensions, you have the same four dimensions in Afrocentricity. And so you have to locate the phenomena, and you can't locate something in a place without, of course, discussing the period and you know what is going on in the world at that time. So a phenom must be studied and analyzed in relationship to psychological time and space. It must always be located. This is the only way to investigate the complex interrelationships of science and art, design and execution, creation and maintenance, generation and tradition, and other areas bypassed by theory. The Afrocentric method considers phenomena to be diverse, dynamic, and in motion, and therefore it is necessary for a person to accurately note and record the location of phenomena, even in the midst of fluctuations. This means that the investigator must know where he or she is standing in the process. And so, you know, Afrocentricity highlights the fact that human beings exist within a cultural context, and their specific time and place shapes how they think and move in the world. And as researchers, that personal and cultural experience comes into the fore of their research and their explanation of and synthesis of the data. And so what he's saying here is that people are biased, and no matter how hard you try, you know, you're going to have a level of bias because all human beings are shaped by their experiences. And so when you're researching any phenomenon and you're coming across literature about that phenomena, you always have to locate the author. Where is their perspective coming from? Is it a native perspective? Is it an outsider's perspective? Is it from a different field looking in? You know, these are things that help us to rightly evaluate the text. And so this is from Raylan Rabaka, his essay in the Encyclopedia of Black Studies, edited by Malefe Ketiasante and Ama Mazama. And he says, placing African ideals at the center of any analysis that involves African culture and behavior, as well as asking crucial cultural questions and categories such as location, place, and stance. This is what he talks about in regards to what Afrocentricity is. Afrocentricity allows dislocated Africans, those people who are off-centered, who operate through a Eurocentric, Arab-centric, Native American-centric, whatever, space alien-centric perspective. That is, Africans moved off of their cultural territory and who have imperial relationship with African cultural theory, right? Always trying to diminish African thought in ways of knowing and ways of being, and traditions to relocate, to return and reclaim their long denied humanity, history, and heritage. All of this is going to become relevant in a few moments. And so going back to the text Afrocentricity by Dr. Asante, he says, indeed, culture is the most revolutionary stage of awareness. That is, culture in the sense that Makar Cabral, Frantz Fanon, and Malana Karenga have written about. This is at the macro level of education and includes science, music, engineering, architecture, dance, art, philosophy, and economics. When we move away from the Eurocentric framework, we become more innovative. We become more creative. So I'll stop right here. Notice that when he's talking about this macro level of education, it includes science, music, engineering, architecture, dance, art, philosophy, and economics. So unlike the debates that are going on for the STEM, STEM versus STEAM, Afrocentricity doesn't make such a separation. It's included in the same educational milieu and paradigm. When we move away from a Eurocentric framework, we become more innovative. And we're going to see, how meaningful that statement is throughout this discourse. We know that it is difficult to create freely when you use someone else's motifs, styles, images, and perspectives. Thus, the Afrocentric awareness is the total commitment to African liberation anywhere and everywhere by a consistent, determined effort to repair any psychic, economic, physical, or cultural damage done to Africans. And so this is just part of the creative process, the inspiration in terms of reframing STEM or STEAM into O.G.U.N. So many of you will know that O.G.U.N is a name of an African deity. And so when we're talking about the sciences and technology and things of this nature, we already personified that as the deity, the Orisha O.G.U.N in the Yoruba tradition that we colloquially call Isheshe today, right? So, in this Afrocentric tradition, it is our duty to reshape the world in our own perspective, in our own worldview, using the tools at hand. And so this is why I want the O.G.U.N perspective to just be standard within the culture, but especially amongst those of us who are Afrocentric, right? And so Dr. Amos Wilson, in his Blueprint for Black Power, discusses, many definitions of culture. And so he cites this one definition of culture that is meaningful for us today. And he says, Horton and Hunt provide a workable answer to this question, the question of what is culture. From their life experiences, a group develops a set of rules and procedures, basically an algorithm for meeting their needs. So, culture is here to meet the needs of a particular population. The set of rules and procedures, together with supporting set of ideals and values, is called a culture, right? So we have to keep this in mind throughout this discourse, where we're trying to solve African problems and supported by African ideals and values. That's the nature of Afrocentricity, right? Culture constructs definitions, meanings, and purposes. These cultural constructs are used to proactively and reactively mold the mind, body, spirit, and behavior of the constituent members of a culture. So what we're trying to do is to create a culture that is centered around this idea of O.G.U.N. Socially, culture patterns the ways its members perceive each other, relate to, and interact with each other. So there's a human component to this. And so what we're trying to do is to help African people see each other as valuable and to see our cultures as valuable and to learn how to create value and to see each other again as valuable. Because then and only then can you create an economic system. And so part of the O.G.U.N tradition that exists and that we're creating from this day forward has a large economic component to it. And so as Dr. Malana Karanga has emphasized repeatedly, the first act of a self-conscious, self-determining people is to redefine and reshape the world in their own image and interest. So STEM is cool, but O.G.U.N is cooler, right? O.G.U.N's ice water is colder than STEM's. That's what I argue, right? Because it's our own. It's coming from our own mind. And so any, African or any educational program, period, should be able to answer for the human person four fundamental questions of being. And that is, who am I? Where did I come from? What is my purpose? And what must I do to fulfill that purpose? And so the O.G.U.N tradition that we are starting, helps each and every one of us to answer this question for ourselves. So who is O.G.U.N, right? A good book that I highly recommend for everyone is this text, Africa's O.G.U.N, Old World and New. And the second edition, the second expanded edition, right? So this was published in 1997. So if you find the first edition, look for the second edition. It's the expanded one. And so, when you look up online anywhere, usually when they talk about O.G.U.N, it is defined in this very way as discussed in this text. And it says on page 107, O.G.U.N represents war, violence, and destruction. And so if O.G.U.N represents war, violence, and destruction, Brother Asar, why do you want to name or rename STEM or African-centered STEM as O.G.U.N? Are you talking about we should be making nuclear bombs and weapons for destruction? Maybe, maybe not, but that's not the focus. There's an expanded and more nuanced association with the concept of O.G.U.N, right? And so, as Barn notes concerning O.G.U.N, there are two aspects to O.G.U.N. One, as a violent warrior, fully armed and laden with frightening charms and medicines to kill his foes. And two, as a leader known for his sexual prowess, who nurtures, protects, and relentlessly pursues truth, equity, and justice, right? But even that's not all that there is to O.G.U.N, right? So one in terms of kingship, and then the other in terms of the development of weapons and warriorship and hunting and the like. And so, you're going to have to get down to the nitty gritty in terms of an etymology of the name O.G.U.N to fully understand O.G.U.N and his many different aspects, right? And And although, we're familiar with Ogun in the Yoruba context, again, the Yoruba people did not invent Ogun. Ogun was inherited even as a term. You find it in many African languages. And as I've discussed before, in ancient Egypt, one variant of Ogun is Sekhmet. And the root of Sekhmet is Him, which is the cognative for womb in the Yoruba language, with S being a prefix and T being the feminine suffix, right? But that's another conversation for another day. But as Dr. Modupe Oduyoye in his text, Words and Meaning in Yoruba Religion, connections between Semitic and ancient Egyptian, and I should say that, he is a theologian and he is a linguist. So he notes that we should study the Yoruba myth of Ogun as the record of the varied philosophizing of the Yoruba on the fantastic phenomena of wildfire put to use of men. So now he's going way back in the earliest of the Stone Age for heating and lighting, for cooking, for hunting and war, and metallurgical factory work and metal crafts. So you got the fire, hunting, war in terms of metallurgical tools and metal crafts. So this can be in arts, or if you're developing, swords and the like. Stage by stage for the first steps in fire lightning to the era of firearms, right? That's page 81. And so, you can see the word goon in Ogun in various different languages. And again, for example, in ancient Kemet, you can see it. Ogun is a word for copper objects. You can see the graphemes here, or Ginu, metal pots or vases. Yoruba Ogun, the Orisha of blacksmiths. In the Fon language is Gun. In the Ham Jaba language is Kuno, the evil spirit who built the iron furnaces. In the Hassa is Makeri, blacksmith. And these are all cognates. So these are based on regular sound meaning correspondences. In the Fon language, Gan, meaning iron. In Arabic, Chayun, meaning smiths. And even in the Hebrew, Chayin is the word for Cain. When you say Cain, you're saying Cain. You're saying Ogun. And so Ogun is an old deity. So not only is he associated with blacksmithing because he created the tools for farming, he's also an agriculturalist. And that's who Cain represented versus Hebel, who was a nomadic herdsman. He was a shepherd. So as we've discussed many times on this program, when you're reading Cain and Abel, you're reading a metaphor of the battle between agriculture and nomadic pastoralism. But that's another conversation for another day, and we will continue. And so, proof of Ogun's origins in fire, and more specifically in volcanoes, is even found in the odus and the sayings and the stories of Ogun. So you can read the Yoruba at the top, but this is translated in English as, on the day Ogun was coming from the top of the mountain, it was with fire he covered himself. It was clothes of blood he wore. And so they're talking about how Ogun, in the form of lava, in the form of brimstone and all that, coming down the mountain, and how it would destroy villages and kill wildlife and all the other kind of stuff. Because Ogun's origin is in the word for fire itself. And we know even in Greek mythology, when they talk about man stealing fire from the gods, that was the beginning of knowledge and technology. That is the metaphor, because everything starts with fire. Fire is the basis of all human knowledge, right? that taming the fire. We were able to, once we were able to tame fire, it was on. Right. And I discussed this in my text, Umoja Volume 2, that came out in 2020. And, you know, in here, I just reinforced that, you know, O.G.U.N is, you know, his earliest associations is with volcanoes, right? And, you know, you can even see the hearse, the early hearse. This is in ancient Egypt on the left. And I forgot, I don't know if this is Dogon or it's somewhere in West Africa. This is a hearth, but it even looks like a volcano, the way that they shaped it. And this is where they create metals, right? And so this particular type of tradition is dying out rapidly in Africa because you can, you know, machines make metal stuff now. But, you know, I think we should revive this tradition and, you know, just as a part of the rites of passage in learning how to make this stuff, right? So, but as Barnes informs us, starting on page 2, O.G.U.N is popularly known as the god of hunting, iron, and warfare, as we stated earlier. Today, however, his realm has expanded to include many new elements, from modern technology to highway safety, anything involving metal, danger, or transportation. In the minds of followers, O.G.U.N conventionally presents two images. The one is a terrifying specter, a violent warrior fully armed and laden with frightening charms and medicines. The other, society's ideal male, a leader known for his sexual prowess who nurtures, protects, and relentlessly pursues truth, equity, and justice. Clearly, this African figure fits the destroyer creator archetype, but to assign him a neat label is itself an injustice, for behind the label lies a complex and varied set of notions. As his devotees put it, O.G.U.N has many faces, which is true. And so on page 29 is reemphasized. The cult of O.G.U.N is highly elaborate in Yoruba country and shows amazing vitality among people directly concerned with modern technology. Right? In 1974, for example, the drivers of the Ibadan University motor transportation or transport system performed a sacrifice to O.G.U.N in the presence of the vice chancellor and a dozen or so of the other high officials of the university. One of the drivers, who came from Igara and Ibira town in the northwestern extension in Bendel State, was a particularly enthusiastic participant in the dances that followed the sacrifice of a dog. I cite this case and its illustration of the point made by Barnes that O.G.U.N cult continues to appeal to socially rather marginal men who are directly involved in the use of modern machines constructed largely of iron and steel. She goes so far as to call O.G.U.N cult the cult of revolution, therefore the technological revolution brought about by the introduction of iron making and the occupational specialization necessitated by this innovation. So we're talking about technology science. So O.G.U.N is not just a deity dealing with war and just making devices like swords or spears and the like for hunting or war. He also makes the tools for agriculture and the machines. So now if we're dealing with modern machines, again, we're going back to the fire route, because now you have the hard fire in the form of the metal or iron or whatever the new, casing is in modern times, but you're still dealing with electricity because and which is part of that fire, that O.G.U.N. So O.G.U.N not only dealing with volcanic fire in terms of lava, and then of course the fire from the forest fires that occur during the process of a volcanic eruption, but also volcanoes spit out lightning, right? And so the electricity part of this. So if we're talking about O.G.U.N in a modern sense, you would have to include him in terms of computer science, engineering, data analysis, electrical engineering, physics. And so hopefully y'all see where I'm getting at and why I name it O.G.U.N, right? How comfortable is he with modern technology? Talking about O.G.U.N. Oh, he invented it. O.G.U.N would be absolutely delighted with the high-tech shit we fool around with. If you talk about computers, you're talking about the hardware. It always refers you to the iron complex. O.G.U.N is the driving force of technology because he's got all of this strength inside of him. In Puerto Rico, there's a seal for Campana Fomento, and the symbol is a man pushing a giant gear. He is going like this, grunts, strenuous work. That's O.G.U.N. He needs that strength. There is another myth about when he tried to become a Babalawo. You know Babalawo. They are very refined types of people, diviners. So he tried to become a Babalawo. But he thought the small opele, the divining chain, didn't do it. So he made this huge iron opele and he was throwing it and boom. Every time he was throwing it, the whole earth shook. And Obatala said, "Who's making all that noise?" And when he saw it was O.G.U.N, he said, "Go back to your forge." And so, we're still holding on to traditional ideas in terms of deity, but you can see at the end of the day, O.G.U.N represents science and the creative sciences dealing with technologies. And so you're going to have to incorporate in a modern context mathematics, physics, and of course, engineering, whether you're talking about software engineering or whether you're talking about mechanical engineering. All of that is O.G.U.N. And so now we get into what I mean by the acronym of O.G.U.N. And a few of y'all who came to the online Western Region ASCAC conference got a glimpse of this. And so now I'm going to go into detail. So O.G.U.N is an acronym for us today, which stands for, and in some of these terms will be interchanged with other terms, as we'll see throughout this conversation. So, you spell O.G.U.N, O.G.U.N. And so it stands for essentially the study of the organization, in other words, the systems of God, verse, in nature. And we can coin the term organology. And I'll save that discussion for another time in terms of the organology and what that means. But O.G.U.N stands for the study of the organization, the system of God plus universe plus nature, right? Or you can say the systematic or the study or the systematic study of the observations of God, universe, and nature. And so now we're going to get into the individual letters and what they mean for us. And so when we're talking about O, when we're talking about those observations or the organization, we're talking about methods, epistemology, pedagogy, andragogy, ontology, and measurements, right? So pedagogy is, how do we teach children? How do we teach young people? And then when you talk about andragogy, you're talking about teaching adults, right? So there's a teaching process, but there's also a research process. So that's where the methods and epistemology comes into being, and the discussion about your measurements and the like. And of course, ontology is the study of being and what is. All of that goes in the O. So the O deals with, how do you research and teach? The G.U.N, right? The O.G.U.N. How do you research and teach and use and practicalize the O.G.U.N, which stands for God, Universe, and Nature. And so, because we're dealing with teaching, we're dealing with stages of being in learning, and so we got to come up with terms for when people have graduated and mastered these fields. And so you have native Yoruba words like Oluwa or Olori, that means master. And so, this is what we want to be able to call individuals who are masters at a field or a particular in O.G.U.N. And so we got to come up with a degree plan and, test and, be able to award people with the titles of Oluwa or Olori. And Olu, is like the chief or king, and Iwa is a character. So that's when they say Oluwa is the chief or the master of character, right? But all of this is master. Or you could say Oga. Oga also a word for chief or master in the Yoruba language. So we're putting on our African thinking cap, and we're thinking of ways on how to, reorganize and reshape the educational process in our own image. And so when you're dealing with O.G.U.N, right? Again, this is an acronym. So we dealt with the O, dealing with the educational part in terms of both the research and the teaching component and the practical applications of the O.G.U.N. And so again, O.G.U.N stands for God, Universe, and Nature. And so when we're talking about God, we are talking about the subjects, for example, of African spirituality, African cultures, African languages and linguistics, warfare, arts, and ethics. And we'll get into detail of why all of that is under the God component or the God term, right? Then you have universe. Universe in terms of astrophysics, cosmology, particle physics, quantum mechanics, et cetera, et cetera. So this is under the subsection of what's not on Earth. So it's divided on into what's not on Earth and what's on Earth. And then nature. And so this is the study of biology, physics, agriculture, technology, et cetera, et cetera. So that's nature. What's on Earth? Anything that's not on Earth is astrophysics, cosmology, particle physics, quantum mechanics, et cetera, et cetera. So, of course, there's not a fine cut line between the two because, of course, they interact. For the sake of division, this is how we divide it. So let's go back to that God component. And so if you have my text, Yoruba Orisha, Chiluba Maweja, Yoruba Orisha, and ancient Egyptian Ak, an etymological study, you'll know that the words for God in African languages ultimately refers to either ancestors or just powerful and knowledgeable human beings. There it is dealing with human endeavors. And we apply this title, to ancestors, non-ancestral, non-human ancestral beings. They're still ancestors because we all come from the elements. And then, of course, the totality of everything everything and all things as one, is, you know, which we would call the great Neter, right? The great God. Chukwu in Igbo, the great God, right? And so in ancient Egypt is the word Neter. And as we have, you know, discussed time and time again, you know, what is Neter in ancient Egypt is it has its cognate in Chiluba as the word Inkole or Inkwele. That's the word for God. But Inkole also applies to human beings, eminent or powerful man. And when you talk about the Ba Inkole, you're talking about the spirits, ghosts, and ancestors, etc. It comes from the root code, which means to become strong, right? And that root can be found in many different forms. In one form, when you say Mukulu, is the word for chief, director, president, or the head. In Kela, an erudite and learned man, educated, civilized, and noble. Right? When it's followed by the I, it can become the word for a hawk, even an alligator or whatnot. It's dealing with animals. And so what I also showed in that text is that Heru is a dialectical form of the word Neter, right? And so this is where you get this concept of divine kingship from, because there's no word that separates the word for king and the word for God, or the word for ancestors, but it just means someone with great agency, with the ability to make things happen. That's all a God is. It is an entity that can make things happen, that has an abundance of power and energy. That's it, right? And so, as Dr. Chilemalima Mukinge has taught us in Muntu Zambi, and even in personal conversations that I've had with him. So this is from a personal conversation, and I put this in the Aluja book as well as in the Chiluba Maweja text, is that there's a variant of that word Inkole that is called Bukole. And as Dr. Chilema has informed me, because remember the root comes from a word meaning strong or to become strong, a verb meaning to become strong. And so there's many different variations depending on the prefixes and suffixes to the root that you get an expanded context. So this word here, bukole or bukola, manifests itself in many forms of human creativity and performance, physical aptitude, mental capacity, sexual potency, ability to fight, hard work, endurance, ability to achieve great things, and spiritual power. So since we're dealing with human creativity, remember, this is the same word for God. That's why when we go back, when we talk about the God section, we're talking about human endeavors, human spirituality, culture, language, linguistics, warfare, arts, and ethics. Because these are the terms, this is what comes with these terms. So he says, in Chiluba, the word bukole manifests itself in more forms of human creativity and performance. And so physical aptitude, mental capacity, sexual potency, ability to fight, hard work, endurance, ability to achieve great things, and spiritual power. All that is dealing with human social and cultural and mental attitudes and experiences. So that's what we study under the God part of the O.G.U.N, of the O.G.U.N acronym. And so all of these the universe and nature, outside if we're studying, human beings from a physical standpoint, because your health would be under nature, right? But it would have to interact with the human parts. We're dealing with the God and spirituality and ethics and values and all that. That goes under the God acronym. But when we're talking about, you know, the physics, laws of nature, and everything else, that would fall either under universe or nature in our conceptualization of O.G.U.N as a paradigm, right? And so even when we're talking about the Bukola, Inkola, the Ba Inkola. There's another form, there's an individual form, it's called Mukola, right? And so what he tells us in the text is a community builder as a husband and father of many healthy children and a contributor to significant growth of the extended family, he would be called to be consecrated as an accomplished achiever of wealth, a Mukola. And that word there is cognate with the word nature, a peer of past achievers, living and dead. Procuring many wives for self and relatives was the most praised accomplishment, qualifying one to run for chieftaincy. So you already have to show your ability to acquire wealth and to make great achievements to become a chief or king. This is the prerequisite. So the race was a long and costly process. The candidate had to satisfy incumbent chiefs and power giver dignitaries' immeasurable appetite for riches. Finally, victorious of this long and costly competition for the chieftain throne, he was invested chief, or mfumu, or inkum, or inkam. That's the more ancestral form of this word mfumu, as is discussed in the race and identity in ancient Egypt texts. But you can see here, there's an economic component, because he goes on to show that he has to be able to show that he can achieve wealth and that he is able to distribute and share wealth. So when we're dealing with the God concept, it is dealing with the ability of human beings to know greatly and to be able to accumulate and exchange wealth and to create. And so the God thing is social. The other two, the universe and nature, has to deal with with physics, basically, right? And so, you know, this is a Yoruba calabash, and these, you know, is split into two, since the heavens, or rune, and the earth here. And so we talk about universe, what's not on earth, dealing with runes and the physical heaven, and of course there's the quantum realm or rune, the spiritual realm or rune in the Yoruba tradition, and of course nature, what is on earth, right? And so some of y'all may remember a guest that we had on our program on the Mbongi named Dr. Alexis Bekyani Tingan. He's of the Dagara people in northern Ghana. And he wrote a text of life and health, the language of art and religion in an African medical system. And in our discussion, starting in 18 minutes and 40 seconds, he says Dagara religion is all about the cosmos, the cosmic force, the cosmic energy. Cosmos equals everything that is together, what is on earth and what is not on earth. So this is where I got the dividing it on what is on earth and what is not on earth from. You need to know and interact with this cosmos. Whatever you do practically to get to know the cosmos, you do it in the form of deity, the form of God, the form of divinity. You give it a personality using one of the forces. This is what the African tradition is. You deify the concepts, you give it a personality, and then whatever you're learning about that aspect of the cosmos, either what is on earth or what is not, you include that in your creative narratives about the deity. So we're taking a more all-encompassing approach, and we're naming it after a deity, O.G.U.N. But you know, the objective is not to recreate an O.G.U.N spiritual system. If you want to become an O.G.U.N priest in the traditional sense, you need to find a Yoruba Isheshe Ile or house, and you need to get initiated into that. This is something totally different. And so, you're not required to do no sacrifices and nothing to that nature. This is purely an educational, pedagogical thing, right? And so, we're not discounting that. We have paths and avenues for that, but I don't want y'all to confuse what we're talking about here with a priesthood path into O.G.U.N. That's something totally different. So this is more of a modern application of an concept. And so what he calls space above, Sazu, and space below, Tangzu. So this is space Zu above the sky, heaven. That's the word Sa, and Tang is the word for earth, and that's what is cognitive with the word Ta or Ter in ancient Egyptian, and Sa, rain, sky, heavens, is what's cognitive with the god Shu, which you can see right here, which is the division. So this is Geb, the earth, and this is Nut, the heavens, the starry sky. So when we're talking about Shu, we're talking about the heavens below the night sky. So what we call our atmosphere and all that other kind of stuff, right? Stratosphere and the like, which holds up, the night sky. So this is their creative way of talking about natural phenomena in ancient Kemet, right? And so we do all of this because we have, as African centered, scholars and warrior scholars and just students of life and living, we have a nation building objective and ancestral mission. All of this, the O.G.U.N fields for us, is used to nation build. And we can have another discussion on the nature of the nation building aspect of it. But I just want to kind of emphasize here what nation building is in terms of African-centered education and what it encompasses, so that I can show you that I'm not thinking of things out of my behind. This is already established part of the Afrocentric paradigm and mission, right? So this is a text by Kwame Age Akoto, Nation Building, Theory and Practice in African-Centered Education, right? So he talks about African-centered education is rooted in unique history and evolved culture of African people. It is defined in a singular commitment to the elucidation of that history, that culture, and that confirmation, invigoration, and perpetuation of the African collective identity that emanates from that history and culture. African-centered education is concerned with the origins, current status, and future of the African world. African-centered education is committed to correcting the historical distortions born of 3 millennia of foreign invasion, destruction, enslavement, physical and mental colonialism, cultural disruption, and dependency. African-centered education is committed to rooting or anchoring the spiritual and intellectual energies of African people in the spiritual, moral, and philosophical traditions of Africa. African-centered education, whether it's several nations of the diaspora or in the motherland, is concerned to fully develop the sense of African nationality within a broader pan-African world. African-centered education is concerned to sever irrevocably the pathological and Slavish linkage of Africans to European or Asian ethos. This is why we reframe things in our own image. African-centered education is concerned to enable the African person with nation building, nation management, and nation maintenance abilities. African-centered education is concerned to motivate teacher, student, parent, community to advance the African nation world by any means necessary. Now replace African-centered education with O.G.U.N. They're the same. So if I say O.G.U.N. centered education, or O.G.U.N., whether in several nations of the diaspora or the motherland, etc., is concerned to fully develop the sense of African nationality within a broader Pan-African worldview, right? The future of the African world must begin with the confirmed sense of African nationality defined within the universe of African spiritual, moral, philosophical traditions, and committed to the material and spiritual development and independence of the African world. Only an unambiguously African-centered education can possibly accomplish this goal. African-centered education is to be distinguished from the current educational philosophies being employed in independent African nations and national enclaves in the Americas, Asia, and the Pacific and Europe. African-centered education, or more so O.G.U.N., rejects the implicit and explicit superiority of European and Asian intellectual, political, and spiritual traditions that characterize the systems of former colonies, dependencies, and slave populations of the African world. It rejects the false historical notion that Asian, therefore Arabic, and European civilizations rescued Africa from the barbarism and godlessness. African-centered, or O.G.U.N., seeks to restore the traditions of Africa to prominence, to revitalize those traditions and imbue them with the liberating and progressive dynamics of what? Nation building. And so within that conversation of the nation building, remember, it's about theory and practice, and in terms of the educational system that we're developing for ourselves. So when we talk about the nation building, the purpose of O.G.U.N. ultimately is to develop, maintain, and defend and expand centered spaces. So whether we're talking about institutions, educational institutions, whether we're talking about economic centers, whether we're talking about townships, whether we're talking about cities, or whether we're talking about states or nations as a whole. That's what O.G.U.N's objective is. And so within that curriculum domain, there's a section in the text where it's titled The African-Centered Thematic Inventory, Recurrent Themes and Nationalist Pan-African Theories of Liberation and the Philosophical Foundations of the African-Centered Curriculum. Curriculum domains provide the basis for the organization of the subject matter within a prototypical African-centered curriculum. When was this book published? This was in 2002, right? The year I pledged Alpha Phi Alpha. And shout out to all the brothers of Alpha who we just on December 4th celebrated our Founders Day. That's another topic for another day. Let's continue. And so in the curriculum domains, and so I wanted to put this here to show you that this has been a long-standing basis for African-centered education. Cultural ideological. This will go under the GOON, the God part of the O.G.U.N. acronym. Cultural ideological, culture and ideology, creativity, spiritual psychoaffective, self-knowledge, ethics and morality, social and political and economic, political economy, cognition and inquiry. And so this will go either in both the universe and nature in terms of C, D, E, and F. Technology, mathematics, sciences, computer sciences. So what we're trying to get people to understand is that you can be African-centered and be an engineer, a mathematician, a scientist, a computer scientist. This is part of the Afrocentric educational paradigm and part of the reoccurring themes. Technology, mathematics, science, computer science, functional skills. Nation building, practical applications, career development, apprenticeships, research theory and practicums, community development projects, organizational experience. So O.G.U.N. building off of this paradigm in terms of an Afrocentric Pan-Africanism is a holistic approach to nation building, to learning and a set of skills, right? And there's a video that you can look at on YouTube, and it's called the STEM And so, you know, the individual who's speaking on that text, excuse me, speaking on that video is talking about how, you know, the issues surrounding STEM, and, you know, how viable will it be, you know, in the future or whatnot, because allegedly, you know, there's more STEM graduates than there are STEM jobs. But, you know, of course, this is in a European context. But when we're talking about Africa, the fields are wide open. There's so much opportunity for growth and expansion in these fields because of the need of African people to create our own spaces in our own nations and to strengthen the nations that we do have. And so this is why a paradigm like O.G.U.N, a structure like O.G.U.N is necessary, because it grounds us, has us thinking within an African milieu, thinking about African ways to solve, you know, African problems, instead of trying to fit in these other spaces that they've created for themselves, right? And so when we're talking about, for example, architecture, right? You know, if we create, for example, like imagine this as either a university or even a mall, right? Like, how would we design as African-centered architects and African-centered economists, you know, mall or market spaces or educational spaces? What kind of artwork would you have? How would you reinforce the culture, you know, in your space, right? And so these are like AI renditions of ideas, you know, for African spaces. You know, how do we juxtapose the traditional on the modern? If we're building homes and architecture, how would you design this in an Afrocentric style? You know, what's the science behind the materials in fighting off the elements? How would you cool? What is the science behind the cooling in the low energy costs and renewable energies? How would you create the sense of nature around what you're doing? How would you integrate natural spaces in your designs? You know, when you know, I'm a tiny home person. Like, how would you redesign tiny homes? How would you redesign homes? How would you redesign the traditional uh the traditional space, the traditional hut, I should say? How would you modernize it? And of course, you know, even those of you who are into interior design, how would you design your bedroom? Do y'all see the opportunities for economic growth? Who of us are making the pillows? Who of us are making the artwork and the wall stuff here? Who is designing the beds? How do you shape the metals to get in to hold these boxes? What is our relationship to the land and gathering of wood? Could we make alternatives so we don't have to chop down as many trees and get a wood look? Like, these are all the things that we would have to, you know, consider. You know, what is an African feng shui, right? When you're looking at the design, like I love this design here, and you know, because I'm a more, you know, natural, rugged type, but you know, you can add color, and so you can add your oranges or highlights and put some green plants in here to liven the space up, right? When you design homes in the ideal bedrooms, it should reflect the culture. How would you teach this? How would you make this relevant for students, coming up learning, the O.G.U.N fields, right? How would your bathrooms be designed? How would you conserve water? How would your kitchens be designed? There's so much potential. See, the problem with us design and do things the way the Europeans do, when our markets have so much more depth and value and potential. And so, we can design these things. And so you gotta be up on your African centeredness to want this in your home. So who's going to have the TV show teaching us how to do this? Which one of y'all is going to deal with the mass in the metallurgy or the people who deals with chemistry and colors, right? Which one of y'all is going to teach us how to farm, to create the plants and to integrate those spaces to create an inside herb garden? Like, there's so much potential here. So when you get your first space, how are you going to African centerize your space? When you create your office, right? What kind of motifs? So now we're talking about economics here, because what separates STEM from the non-STEM in the traditional sense is that when you enter a STEM field, it is easier to be able to function and create products and services that have a high economic return of value. And so, but of course, in African centered spaces is more than just money. But we have to be able to address the elephant in the room, is that how is African centeredness going to translate into food, clothing, and shelter? This is how you do it. You get into the O.G.U.N fields, and then you demand that wherever it is that we create and we enter, it has this spirit and feeling to it, so that they can see themselves, that your children can see themselves in the spaces in which they interact, whether they're the universities, the malls, or whatever. Right? So this is what we mean here. And then, of course, Afrofuturism. Those who are dealing in film and literature. What can you imagine the future to be? Which one of you are going to design the magnetic, maglev trains that'll take us from South Africa, right? Like these, that's the whole purpose of this. And so I'll end there. I'm trying not to be too long. Is it, to go into depth would require a lot of a lot of discussion. So but I just wanted to give that introduction, and I want to team up. Of course, I'm brilliant because I'm me, but the purpose of this is to team up with people in the community, and let's build this thing. Let's put this together, and let's promote this thing, so that we have what we need to succeed. So, we have about 15 minutes left or so. And so I'm going to put the link or panel in the chat. And I'm going to keep it there for a second, and then I'm going to link it at the top. So for those of you who are watching who want to join the panel and want to have a discussion, ask any questions or whatnot, this would be a good time. Let me see. And let me see if there was any comments while y'all wait. Let me see. See. I don't see anything off the top of my head. And YouTube Academia says O.G.U.N is also set in Egypt. I don't think so. I said Sekhmet, and there's a video that is on my channel. I'm not sure what the title is, but if you go on my channel and you search for O.G.U.N and Sekhmet, it should pop up. And so what I'm saying is that linguistically, O.G.U.N is cognate with the word Sekhmet, and they have similar associations, but there's also major differences in how they're conceptualized and utilized in the relative traditions. And so peace and blessings to Brother Chavez in the building, and to Melissa, look up Duddy Bookman, who kicked off the 1804 Haiti revolution. He followed Islam but called on O.G.U.N to free themselves. Indeed. Let me see who else is in here. Peter Billis, and our good brother Robert Rand is in the building. And we have Hoppy Valley Farms is in the building. Victor Samir is in the building. Thank you all for joining. Green Soap is in the building, and thank you for joining and for your commentary. And so let me see. And y'all two seem to be having a conversation over there. And Brother Chris, peace and blessings to you. X_G. He says, damn, that was a fine bedroom, and I agree. And let me see. 42 Tribes asked, would a start be creating a temple for a water deity in Flint to deal with the lead? I'm not dealing with any temples. I'm not dealing with any deities in that way. So what I don't want is for people to associate this with religion, because that's just going to throw everything off, because then you're going to get into an argument with whether this is tradition or not. You just eliminate that from the top. We're using the word O.G.U.N in an acronym form. And so it stands for the observations, the systematic observations and or organization of God, universe, and nature. And so it's a paradigm for studying. It's a curriculum for nation building. It's our nation building curriculum. And so the individual fields, fall under, one of those three categories in G.U.N. And so, you wouldn't necessarily have to build a temple. You can find an office building. If y'all need to study, get some computers together, and, get your folks who know chemistry and folks who know engineering, and y'all get together and solve the Flint, Michigan water crisis, right? That's just what you do. And thank you, for the compliment, and appreciate both of you again for watching. And, again, if you want to, have a comment or ask a question, you can. And, the link is in the chat for those of you who are watching from Facebook. as well as YouTube. If you're on X or Twitter, then you're going to have to come to Facebook for the link. And so what I'm about to do is pin it to the top. And so let me, so no questions, was everything just that clear? And, you know, so I mean, what do y'all think about the concept? At least tell me what y'all think about the concept. So you can either, you know, join the live, or you can type, you know, your thoughts or whatnot in the chat, you know. And so I want to make this as engaging as possible. So, you know, make sure that you, let me see. You see, he says the link is not visible. Risako Bringai. Oh, I'm watching somebody sharing the video. So let me look here. And while y'all do that, y'all can watch this commercial.
Yeah. Tokyo wanna those that. What's up? Feeling like I dropped the draw for in part uno. Came to kick the door where the game man judo. Pin game low, that's why they give me kudos. Inspired by the 3-0. 595, check it for pack light. Hit the turnpike, slide to a baseline. Gotta sound like I just hit the 8-5. Oh, I'm so ready. By enemies necessary, we gon' be legendary. Hold up. About to grow the payrolls. If you see the vision and you're with it, you should say so. Cause we about building, elevating the millions.
And we are back with O.G.U.N's Machete. Peace and blessings, good brother. H-Town in the building.
Peace, brother. Right on.
What's going on? What's going on?
It was a great presentation, brother. One of the things that always comes up, I think, when you're dealing with just science in general or STEM, you know, you got the hood side of nation building where you got black folk, you know, that aren't really into consciousness or anything like that, and it's usually anti-science. So you got, you know, just your black community that's anti-science. And then on top of that, your conscious community is usually anti-science. You know, they think that's for the white man. Everybody thinks it's for the white man. So my question is, how do we make this appealing to the masses?
That's part of the underlying question. I don't know if you were here at the very beginning, but I played a video clip of Data, and you know, he was talking about this challenge of, for example, how do you, and he and I talk every week, so you know, and so this is something that comes up frequently. You know, how do you recruit new researchers, you know, in classical African studies? Like, how do you appeal to them? And, you know, we can expand that question to what you just asked right now. And so, you know, with us being a visual people, we are the show me people. Show me it working consistently and viably in your life, and I will be inspired to do what you do. So that's why I'm saying to include, like, there's an aesthetic component. So that's why the STEM becomes STEAM for them, to include arts in that process, because you're going to have to aesthetically show it to our people. So if they come to a home that is, you know, African centered from ceiling to floor, in terms of its patterns, in terms of its right, and this person has either a good job or a successful business, and they're paying for all this. Like, how? Because we want to know what is working for you, and how are you able to move in this way? And so that's the ultimate challenge, you know, for us. And so there's the aesthetic component, and so we got to create the spaces. So, you know, there's many of us who are doing it. We just have to become more visible. So, like, one of the things that I intend to do with this channel is to, it's not that many, but there's enough that we can do a series of videos showcasing those who do it, who are African centered people, but who are living well, either really well or just comfortable. And if we see them doing it and we can get inspired and we have ideas, and then so that's one way in which we can do it. Because again, I'm more focused on, well, I not more focused, but there is a focus on how do I get them to see, like how do we get to make the connection of Professor James Smalls and Leonard Jeffries, owning a hotel in Ghana. What does that mean, right? If we can get one of y'all who are into engineering and stuff like this, or who owns a business, right? Like, so when we're doing the interviews, I can ask you questions like, how does your African centered value system, interplay with your business, and how does you integrate that into, you know, um, moving in the space, like they just have to see it. So just like how we used to watch Sesame Street and Reading Rainbow, and even how we have like a Neil deGrasse Tyson, for science in general, right? But how more powerful would he be if he was openly an African centered person, can defend this, and still be able to bring science, but also connect it to culture, in a very powerful way, like a Sheikh Anta Diop if he was alive, because we talk about his his arguments on a Black African Nile Valley in ancient Kemet, but we don't talk about his degrees in chemistry and physics, the creation of the carbon lab. Like, we need to see us doing that. It's a visual thing. So from there, it takes people like us who are watching this to make the sacrifice and create something, but also create networks so that we can support, so it stays afloat and it prospers, in a way. And then of course, the online lessons and creating universities, like, when Dr. Taka Kilimanjaro and then finished the University of Kemet, we need to be taking courses. We need to grow that thing.
Yeah.
And we also have the other uh the Osiris online school. Like, you can get degrees. Like, it's very African. It's like we just need to promote it. We need to create, whether it's magazines. Like, I thought about, when I first came to Philly, I took an overnight warehouse job just to get, make some money while I was, here before I find something else at a store called Wegmans. It's a grocery store that you find in the Northeast. You don't find them too much in Texas. Or I don't even think they're in Texas at all. But if you're in the Northeast, you know about Wegmans. So I used to work overnight doing stocking and stuff like that. But they had a magazine. They had a magazine where they would show products that they sold in the store, and they would have specials. Get some, broccoli and Brussels sprouts and da da da. Here's some oils for this. But they also had recipes for how to utilize the products that they had in the store, right? And this was given out free, for a time, and then they charge a little later. But like, we need to create, even if it's an online version. So that's the motion behind. Like, I have a thing coming up called Chicago Square, right? Building off of what happened in Congo Square in New Orleans. And there's a Congo Square in Philly too, and it functioned in the same way. This is where we met, where we Also, they talk about the singing and dancing and the creation of jazz, but this is also where they came to do market. They were able to sell goods. So if we have products, we can create a magazine or online thing, for example, showing like how if I can share my screen, and I'm gonna get our good brother in the conversation in just a second. But just to remind folks, for example, like so let's say that Zoo design beds and you design, woodwork stuff like this. And and I have the magazine. So we link together and we put a design concept and we tell folks where they can get each one of these items from everybody who's in the chat and who designs and makes stuff like this. And then in between there, you can have an article by somebody, just a brief bit about a history or something like that. Don't overwhelm them.
Right.
But, enough that, it makes sense in the context of this. Right. So this is how you do it. So it's like, wow, so in other words, we're making us valuable by doing stuff like that. So that's one way in which we can attack it. And there's others, but that's just the point of this conversation. So, again, me being a Leo and of course the firstborn, there's a certain ego that just comes with me in acknowledging my own genius. But at the same time, I'm a scientist, so I'm very humble and know I can't do everything. I can't dream up of everything. That is only in community with all you creative folks that we can make this happen. So I'm putting this out here saying that I need your help. Help. Let's build this together and see what we can do and make it happen. But Zoo 221 was good, brother.
Man, peace to you, man. I enjoyed what I call the presentation. I think you bring up some very pertinent and beautiful points. Everything that people are talking about on these internet streets that usually end up in very divisive rhetoric, conclusions, and kind of talk. But the things that you're talking about, they're very important, and they come back to what you had even mentioned earlier, this idea of economics or culture, economics and science through culture, and that's where it starts. You have to be able to fund all of the things that we're talking about, so that starts with building those relationships and those businesses and being able to make those products, and maybe even just organizing concerned people to put some money where it needs to go sometimes. And whether that's upwards of $1,000 at a time or what have you. The thing you said about Brother Smalls and his hotel, I think, was a really genius idea and really falls into the global trends in the Black world right now. So I think that if more of us were on point, we'd have a team that had a fund that would go out there and already have that footage, and would have connected with some other folks that are doing big things. Shoot, man, there's so much to comment on. But one thing that comes to mind also is ideas like scholarships, $500, $300, doesn't have to be something that's too crazy.
Yeah.
Uh, Goes a long way to people who are trying to um, make it in the academic world, or trying to make the decision where they want to spend their efforts and their time, um, et cetera, et cetera. So there's so much, but I like what you brought up. It's making me think about what we can do, and I appreciate you for providing a platform where we can do that.
And yeah, it's it's hard to put into words because I see so much potential for this. Because one of the things I haven't put, but I've said it a million times, is again, you build an economy off your culture, and that's what I was trying to get at with the architecture. So we can start off small. Let's say a group of us got together and learned how to build tiny homes,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we so we got a feel for how to build them, but then um we start playing with some designs to Africanize the the designs and features and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And we came together, we built like 2 or 3 prototypes, and we got some land, and then we can rent them out, you know and like I saw something the other day, and I may have saw it. I don't know where I saw it. I don't know if I saw it on my phone or someone else's phone, but there's a company that is building these small homes in the western part of the United States on a reservation, right,
Mm-hmm.
for like $15,000. Like their budget is 20,000, but they're able to build the structure and design components inside for $15,000. And so that's what I'm saying. Like something that wouldn't take, it's still a lot of money, but it wouldn't be like 300,000 that we would need to build one home. Like if
Right.
if we were able to get what, $60,000 and be able to build 3 of these particular spaces, they would serve as a prototype, part of the learning process, and and
Eventually, a return on investment.
exactly. So now what happens is we can create a company based on that. We can also um, even get involved in possibly getting grants and stuff to be able to teach this in urban areas and schools.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to be able to teach folks how to convert sprinter vans into living spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Because the objectives, because part of the conversation is to reduce your cost of living so that you're able to save and invest more.
Right.
And
Right.
so, like what Milana Karenga has said one time, it just stays in my head, that in order to free the people, you must first free their labor.
Fact.
And so, we have to create the opportunities to where, you know, they aren't essentially being enslaved in another space, and then they have to do liberation work after work. But let's
Right.
say, for
Right.
example, we
Like the
create
brother brought up the
uh
idea of the temple or something like that, and like I think so much is in the name sometimes. You know, right now you need spaces that are like you said, you need a space that can provide a model and means for people to reduce their out their what they're consuming and what they're spending. You know what I mean? And on the
Exactly.
other hand, learn new ways of investing and making money that are, you know, proper to the age that we're in right now. You know what I mean? Also, preferably stuff that's remote. You know what I mean? But even if it's not that, I think there's a lot. There's a
Even
lot
if
of that.
it's
You know what I mean? And we know a few people that are somewhat successful in those arenas. The thing that comes to my mind often is like the
even
idea of involving Africa with it, because go ahead, because that's gonna take us into a whole other thing for real.
no, but what before you go, with the issue with the temple is that there's certain, like, I don't want to use words like priest. I don't want to use
Yep.
words like temple, because African folks, we love religion, and everything to just overcomplicate. You need to be initiated into the O.G.U.N. All initiation is the socialization education process. So
Yeah.
we're doing is creating. It's an initiation. You don't have to use the word initiation because people don't even know what that means. We
No,
we
that's a
use
fact.
English words, but we don't know what English words mean. And so we're always trying to religify everything. I don't want no babas, no master teachers, none of that crap.
You know, Baba Lao pointing up,
Because
talking about the AI spirit.
no, but I do want people to get involved with that, but that's a personal thing.
Right.
So if you
For
want to
sure.
go the path of Babalawo, there's plenty of Yoruba folks and Ilays that'll help you do that.
Yeah, it's
This
about
is something that
practicality, man. It's
is
about
this is
practicality.
practicality, and I don't want to be debating and arguing with folks on what this. It's like, no, this is E equals MC squared. This is what we're dealing with. How do we translate? How do we build wind turbines to create? How do we harness river movement to create electricity? Let me show you how to program your own key cards so that you can make your own key codes and safe things in the house. How to program and use your you know your cameras, for as motion detectors and stuff like this. There's so much that we can do, like if we're teaching. So even if we have a component of us who do this and still get jobs in regular spaces, the idea is that you make the great money, but you live way below your means so that you can take some of that money and invest in others to do this. Like it's a whole paradigm. And so, but we can't get caught up in the again, I don't want to just be in those debates, about whether it's so and so's a priest and he's a Kemetic priest, and shut up. That's not the point. It's because the conscious community, is just I love them, but I hate them at the same damn time. It's just because we just out there with this dumb stuff, just nonsensical stuff, and so. So it's the orientation is Africa, but you're still dealing with just hard science and stuff like this. So it's no need to reinvent the wheel. It's just that when we make discoveries and things, we give them African names. That's just how it goes. Whatever group discovers and makes something, they name it. There's naming rights. That's why certain of your star constellations are Arabic and all this other kind of stuff, because they discovered it first. And so if we in the game now, we making all this, we got naming rights, and we're gonna name O.G.U.N, O.G.U.N, that is whatever it is that we discover and make. But
right on.
But that's again, it's I don't have all the answers, of course, but that's why I'm soliciting, the help of y'all. And so even if we just make the plan, and there's different phases and different avenues in which ways people feel more comfortable. You know, we
And I
create
think that's where
processes, of
a
course.
lot of initiatives fail. In a lot of these other groups, you know, people have great ideas, um,
No
but like I
execution
know
plan.
one thing that separates us from a lot of the older groups is that the older groups didn't expect for like the common person, the civilian or the lay person to just get it. You know what I mean? They made manifestos. You know, they damn near come to your house. I was talking to one of my older acquaintances, and he was like, "Man, y'all are so soft these days. Like back in the day, we'd just tell you about yourself, not even know you." And you know, it's true, you know, and you see that in some of the older folks who were there during the civil rights era and things like that. And it's not to say that, you know, anyone should be disrespectful or offensive or anything like that, but it's about communicating a message to get things done and not just to be, like he said, debating or communicating and
But
stuff like that.
this is why like Dr. Amos Wilson was like, you know, he's like my number one guy because, you know, and there were a few others, but he literally put a blueprint for Black Power. That's all I'm really doing is
Mhm.
I'm making my contribution off the plan that he built, you know, that he designed. And so that's what we need. We need many of us to test what the elders and the ancestors have already laid out. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's just about execution now. And so now, you know, even though they have these large plans, you know, with the fundamental, now we need to get the more detailed plans, the step-by-step instructions for how to get this, you know, and this done, and to create a space to do that. And so, you know, and I want to answer this question. So Donnie Williams says, how do you free someone's labor? You free someone's labor by creating an economic system to where they have enough time, excuse me, they get paid enough off of an adequate amount of hours. So right now, the standard is 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. You know, you wake up early and you don't come home till it's night, right? And then if you have a family, you got to deal with your kids and your wife and your husband, and you know, God forbid you're a student, got to study and all this other kind of stuff. Your labor is taking up too much of your time. So if you can create a system, for example, where you work 4 days a week and you have 3 days off, one of those days could be dedicated to, you know, self-improvement, studying, investment, da 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 da, and then your other two just for errands or whatnot. This is a way that you free up the labor so that all of your labor and work doesn't go towards Europeans and building up their families and things. That we create the spaces where our labor benefits us directly. So it's not that, because this is how it is. If I got an engineering degree, who am I going to work for? Another European engineering firm. But if I can develop an engineering firm, I can hire other Black engineers, freeing them from you know, building up their system. Because you got to, because this is, I was listening to Amos Wilson earlier today, and it is his lecture on Blueprint for Black Power, and he says, you know, when he's it's a section of the conversation where he's talking about, you know, what is the purpose of an education, and a lot of people will respond to get a good job, and then he asks the question, well, what makes you think the jobs are going to be available when you graduate?
Mhm.
Like Europeans, it's hard for them to develop jobs for themselves. You know, they're not going to develop jobs for you, not no high paying jobs. So you have to develop a skill set and a network to be able to develop your own jobs.
Mhm.
This is one way that you free, not that you're not doing any labor, is just that you're freeing your labor from being on others outside of your community and self. So ultimately, that's where we want to be. A lot of us are going to have to start off there. But if we have let's say a 10-year plan, I'm going to work this, I'm going to save this amount, and here's my exit strategy. I'm going to learn and I'm going to study.
And it's also about expectations too. Like people can't expect that their life is gonna just change overnight. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
I'm just going to graduate and start.
If somebody provides you a way where you can spend 2 hours, or an hour and make $60 every day or every 2 days, that's not gonna make you rich, but that's a start for you to be able to put some things more in order. You know what I
Right
mean?
on.
And go from there.
So I got a concept I call Kujichagulia, just
Okay.
short for Kujichagulia and Kazi work, and just self work. And so, historically, when we were enslaved, uh, we probably only had Sundays off because that's the day of the Sabbath and all that stuff. So I usually use Sunday as a Kujichagulia day. So I take the time
Mm-hmm.
out to work on something I want to work on, or to free myself up in ways I want to, either get better at or invest in, or something like that. So usually for me, it's like a Sunday. Sundays, just given our history here, Sunday being our day, not necessarily the Lord's day. For
Mm-hmm.
us to do for sales, and that's usually historically when we had our own market set up on a Sunday, and we got together on a Sunday, and we did work like that for sale.
That's a dope concept.
Indeed.
And to add to that,
Go ahead.
so with that concept, Kujikazi, I do a lot of blue collar work, as you can see. So it's basically just an African centered way of saying do for self, like Elijah Muhammad. And
Hmm.
and so the idea is just Kujikazi I have in my mind is one, learning how to use tools, and then using the Nguza Saba as tools to problem solve to get something done or to achieve something. So another concept is I call rooter to the tutor. Basically means like how do you deal with some A to Z. So for example, how do you make software on a computer? But rooter to the tutor, how do you make a computer? And you got to know how to make a computer first, and then you start. You can kind of follow the lines or something like that. And so these kind of concepts I've been playing with playing with in my mind. Just goes back to like teaching. How can you teach a kid how to do some of this stuff? So some of the stuff I do here, I make these tanks and I use a lot of tools, and
Hmm.
a lot of people don't know how to use a tape measure, or use a hammer. So I tend to look at it. So for me, seeing all this is more from a blue collar perspective. You know, I don't think I ever be an engineer per se, but I can build stuff, and just coming up with a framework to teach that. How do you teach this, and not necessarily to go work for somebody like you say. Do for self. How can you get all this knowledge and this understanding to do for self, and not just go work for NASA? You know, how do we become
Hmm.
NASA? You know.
Yeah, true.
Exactly. And the icons that I'm sharing here. So of course, many of y'all know what Kimoyo is, and
Right on.
y'all should know what the Chicom initiative is. This is the dealing with the agriculture, but the Chicongo Square is going to be dealing with the marketplace, and this is along those lines. So I wanna I have this idea. There's a place that I saw here in Philly that I'm like, if we had an African centered space like this, it would be on. And that was part of the inspiration behind Chicago Square. But the Chicago Square is built off of that, you know, as I stated earlier, in Congo Square in New Orleans and in Philadelphia, there's 2 Congo Squares. And that Sunday was the off day, so to speak. But this is where they could gather for, you know, music and entertainment and celebration. But this is where they also did market exchanges. So even in the enslavement, these African peoples was still doing business and marketing with each other. And so Congo Square was that space. So, you know, I call it Chicongo Square because, you know, Chicam and Congo is cognate with Kemet, and want to distinguish the name so people know it's related but not the same as Congo Square in New Orleans. And but this is a virtual space. So, you know, those of you who have, you know, good quality products that you make and sell, it will, you know, that will be where
I'm working on some right now.
You know, where you can sell it, and but I want to do exactly what I mentioned earlier. So it's not only that, you know, it's there, that you can find these things, but how do we integrate this in a well systemized, like, you know, our own. I don't know what feng shui means. I need to find a definition and then find African terms to translate, you know, and do our own thing, like, you know.
Right.
But that's on the horizon. But so, you know, like, if y'all don't see me doing a lot of videos and stuff, this is why I'm preparing these particular spaces, because you can only, you know, argue with internet fools for so long. But Garfield is still running from this debate. I will stop so I can debate Garfield on that.
So feng shui means wind water.
Wind water.
Yeah,
all right.
that's what I got from Chat GPT.
So that's the literal translation. So I'm going to have to find the overall, so I can find an equivalent to it. But it's not even necessarily equivalent. It's more so just a conceptual idea of creating space, creating sacred space. How do we create sacred space? Like, how should plants? What's an idea for plant orientation from our perspective? You know, in the house, where should, you know, every space in indigenous, there's where you would have your altar and things, but, like, you know, what colors represent something, and how would you liven this room, and you know, I'll leave that to the sisters. But it's
right on.
Like, we need to have those types of discussions, and that's the plan. But
right on.
But yeah,
I would say it's kind of a difficult concept to conceptualize into, like, everyday things, but the African fractals, you know, that's one thing we got, you know, that other people don't have, you know, as in the book African Fractals. I forget the brother who, not the brother, but the guy who wrote it. He talks about that, and a lot of the structures that are built in fractals, you know.
Yeah. Indeed. Well, I went a little bit over time, but
that design on the shirt too, man. That cheap Congo design.
Yeah, it's all. I mean, we have the O.G.U.N on the shirts, you know. So that'll be the first. Even if it's just starting off with a T-shirt business, you know. If I could hook up with some black farmers that sell cotton and we have the print press, like, it's like, this is the conversations that we need to have. What's the supply chain? How do we create an African-centered supply chain, right? But I need to get out of here. But I do appreciate each and every one of you for joining the conversation, and, you know, continue to spread the word, and we'll be having more discussions, you know, like this, and we'll be having shows like, you know, let's do a reverse engineer of something. Let's just reverse engineer something. Like, find something simple, and then we work our way to something that's more complex to get people thinking about how things work and how we can reduplicate, because that's what the Chinese did. So it's like, okay, let's learn everything that they learned. Let's reverse engineer everything and let's make our own versions. And that's what we got to be on. So that's kind of underlying a lot of this. Let's learn the standards where it is now. Let's reverse engineer things and let's make versions of our own, of these things. So, but with that said, I do appreciate each and every one of you for joining the conversation. And so until next time, we out. Peace.
This program was created with the love and support of all our Patreon members and subscribers. If you are not a member yet and would like to see more content like this, consider becoming a member today. The link is in the description of this video. Your support is greatly appreciated.